The 10 Commandments, What If We Did It God's Way? By Loron, An Invitation and a Promise. How would you draw the face of the world? I mean, if you wanted to describe the condition of the planet with a face, would it be a smiley? Or would it look worried? Or afraid? Or maybe even angry? We were meeting with some friends in their home in Costa Rica when I asked them this question. Well, I think Francisco started to give his opinion. But just then something interrupted his words, and we never did find out what he was going to say. Our friend's home was in a long row of simple wooden houses. Each unit shared its walls with the neighbors. As a result, whatever went on in one house could pretty much get heard by the people on either side. And while we were discussing the condition of the world, one of the neighbors came home. Slamming the door, he started yelling at his wife. It was obvious that he had been drinking, and his voice got louder and louder as he demanded something. I no longer recall what it was, but it was something she didn't have. And because she didn't hand it over instantly, he decided to exercise his manly authority by beating her up. "I'm going to teach you to respect me," he shouted. Above the terrific din of blows and screaming, we could hear the voice of a little boy pleading and crying. "No, Daddy. No. Don't hurt Mommy. Please, please, don't hurt her." You are probably reading this in a safe and peaceful environment. Is anyone yelling at you or threatening to beat you? Probably not. So, how would you draw the face of the world? Would you give it a really big smile? Perhaps you may even thinking that I am using an extreme example here, not an illustration of how things really are. You notice I said this happened in Costa Rica, so that's okay, especially if you don't live there, because this is the sort of thing that always happens a long time ago and a long way from here. How many women do you think are being beaten up right now as you read this? In the United States, it occurs every 15 seconds. How often do you think it happens in the rest of the world? I am using domestic violence, an example of how things are in the world today. But I could employ countless other illustrations. How many people do you think are looking in a dumpster or in a landfill right now, hoping to find something to eat? Do you know what is the number one cause of infant death in the world is? Hunger? The World Health Organization reports that 5 million children die every year from causes related to malnutrition. That comes out to 13,700 every day. In just 17 days, that is more than the number of all the people who died in the terrible seaquake and tsunamis of 2004. Consider another example. How many people do you think are homeless? I'm not talking about the ones who got that way because of alcohol or ignorance. Only those lives have been torn apart by war and ethnic violence. The United Nations High Command for Refugees has an estimated 20 million people under its care who are either fleeing or living in extremely insecure conditions. And, speaking of children, how many sleep every night on the streets in the great urban centers of the world with nothing more than the cold pavement for a bed? No one knows exactly, but UNICEF believes it is around 100 million, and the number is growing rapidly due to the AIDS epidemic. And a large percentage of them will become victims of abuse, addictions, and STDs, and many, or perhaps most of them, will become delinquents. Napoleon supposedly observed that in war, God is always on the side of those who have the biggest guns. Today, he would probably not say that, because terrorists depend not on cannons, but on stealth and treachery. And now in many places they have joined forces with the drug barons, who seem to move freely across borders and only once in a while find themselves challenged by the forces of law and order. For a number of years, it appeared as if penicillin was winning the war on social diseases, but that was before AIDS. The disease infects at least 45 million people today. It is wiping out a large portion of the population of sub-Saharan Africa and spreading rapidly everywhere else. Think about it again. How would you draw the face of the world? The strategy we use most often to isolate ourselves from so much suffering is massification. We avoid the pain by visualizing those suffering from such problems as faceless masses rather than as individuals. The other day a bomb went off in the Middle East, but I have never met Mustafa, one of the victims, and I wasn't there when it happened. I didn't try to help him while, choking with dust, he tore desperately through the rubble of his home until he found the body of his sister, the timid and gentle Hannah. My tears didn't flow, while Mustafa beat his fists on the ground and moaned in anguish beside her mangled form. It is easy to talk about tragedies. They happen, of course, but it wasn't my sister who died. A woman gets beaten up every 15 seconds. Yes, but I don't feel the blows. So I simply convert the experience into a statistic. But the time is coming, and it is not far off, when this distancing strategy will no longer work. Because the storm that is breaking on our planet is growing in intensity, and already it is starting to reach into the private world of every human being. A generation ago we heard about drug addicts, but who knew one personally? Now everyone recognizes that tomorrow it may be my son who is a victim, or my daughter who gets an abortion. The attack on the Twin Towers was a wake-up call like nothing else in history. Who does not realize that today we are all vulnerable? Sensationalists, people who go around with a message of doom written on sandwich boards, have always worried about the condition of the world. Now it is the soberest and best informed people who are concerned. 50 years ago, philosophers began talking about existential angst. Back then, it was the private property of a few intellectuals, but that is no longer true today.